Hi folks, I've almost finished making a whole dang video game. It's called Cracks Where the Light Gets In. The name is based on one of those inspirational quotes that people struggle to attribute, and I'm excited to add to the confusion. It's a perfect title for a game that's figuratively about the characters in the story finding hope and opportunities within hardship, and literally about looking for light shining through cracks in a building. Though of course it's actually about solving thinky puzzles with your brain. Cracks is a narrative observational puzzle game set in an alpine valley, loosely based on a few chapters of Frankenstein where the monster learns about a displaced and destitute family by peeking in through their woodshed and tries to help. You play as an outcast in hiding, peering into a one-room shack through gaps in the walls and floorboards, trying to infer what the inhabitants are doing and what led them there. I won't deny that the premise and mechanics puts you in the role of a creepy stalker, so for the record, the player character's motivations are entirely wholesome, and all I can say is, I don't condone invasions of privacy. It's just a game. You've all played something more questionable. The people inside the shack are moving around doing day-to-day stuff, and you're watching them in real time to learn about them while staying hidden because of warnings you were given during your upbringing. It's supposed to be light-hearted and whimsical, on top of some serious human dilemmas. You'll see objects or actions that look fairly commonplace and everyday, but almost everything has a relevance that ties into the character's backstory, so that even mild observations will have some plot significance eventually. The inhabitants have 30 to 60 second cycling animations that change throughout each day, and you'll have to watch what they do and who and what they interact with to interpret their story. You then solve the game by answering questions, each of which has missing words to fill in from a large selection of possible answers. There are no stealth mechanics, but a conceit of the game is that you're supposed to remain unseen, and therefore movement is inherently awkward and restricted, so you get around by moving between fixed spots. I've taken great care to make sure that nothing is arbitrarily hidden, and you can see everything that you'd expect to be able to see, and when you're peering through a gap, you can move around freely to take in every possible angle. This is a semi-linear puzzle game with fixed solutions, so I can't show off too much footage, but this one room is the focal point throughout the whole game, with the expectation that you'll get very, very familiar with it, and all of its permutations from every angle. Obsessive analysis is rewarded by insights into crucial knowledge that's just out of reach. Opening up new perspectives should provide some nice impactful moments as you finally see something you'd previously only guessed at. Subtle changes in the room will have lots of storytelling weight, as virtually every object is relevant to the investigation. There are plot developments over the course of the game to drive your character's motivations, changing the nature of the questions you'll ask and the layout of the room. Your character is not just an observer, but also has their own identity, motivations, and revelations. As the title of the video says, it's a non-murdery Obra Dinn-like. So what makes an Obra Dinn-like? Well, here's my take on it. Return of the Obra Dinn has many scenes that trap you in a section of a ship at a fixed moment in time, then asks you open-endedly to solve 60 crew member fates, their name, killer and manner of death. There are plenty of puzzle games that don't involve flipping switches or pushing boxes, but instead require knowledge of the story and close inspection of the environment. But the player's experience of solving them can still be summarised as realising, oh, I need to do that, and then doing it. While a game like Obra Dinn has you saying, oh, that's what's going on, and then telling the game your thoughts, the game then either silently rejects you, or it rewards you with a big thumbs up and preferably a satisfyingly whooshy animation. I wanted to make a game that had the same vibe. The 3D fixed perspectives might remind you of something like the Myst series, but the idea in those games is to figure out how the world works and slowly pick it apart to unlock progress, while I wanted to make a game where the world was clearly laid out, and the emphasis was entirely on interpreting it correctly. I've added a few things to fiddle with, but they're all set up by the player character or clearly signposted, because I had a specific idea in mind and it hurt the gameplay when the interactions were too obscure. So comparing Cracks Where the Light Gets In to Return of the Obra Dinn is not just an excuse to point out the unintentional rhyme that I now can't unhear, but is genuinely the quickest and most evocative way to describe my game. Especially because there's not much else to compare it to. I thought that when Return of the Obra Dinn was released to such acclaim, it would lead to many similar games with their own twists. I was really looking forward to playing them. Instead, there are dozens of games with one foot in the genre that respectably do their own thing, but haven't given me the same detective feeling. Your Ace Attorneys and Danganronpas have their own mechanics that are great fun, but they revel in withholding information and only occasionally hit that investigative note. Observation had great observation, but missed out on having stuff to observe. The evolution of adventure games leads to genre-bending trailblazers like Disco Elysium and Outer Wilds, which are wonderful at requiring understanding of the world to progress, but that's only a fraction of what they do. Some of the most disappointing games have all the necessary pieces but miss that player agency. The Sherlock Holmes games I've played have held my hand through button prompts, then overwhelmed by suddenly asking me to solve genuinely intriguing mysteries in their entirety with no build-up. Meanwhile, I completed The Forgotten City without feeling like I'd had to put much thought in, making it feel like a theme park ride. Some of the closest might be internet sleuthing games like Cyber Manhunt, maybe Do Not Feed the Monkeys, but they still tend to lead you down a path of specific interactions, and they often put the player at too much of a distance from the mysteries, when I want to get right up close, fixating on a single detail with my hand on my chin, musing over the meanings. A few games have had the vibe I'm after, while not quite providing the same experience. Back in 2015, you had Contradiction, perhaps the best non-unintentionally hilarious FMV game I've seen. Sure, you're just exhausting dialogue and then selecting two things to contradict, but thinking critically to find story inconsistencies is all on you. Keywords has you stuck in what may as well be a single room, looking out at a city, using observation to solve puzzles. It's a lot of fun and does some clever things, but the vibe is subtly different as the puzzles are completely linear and the space you're looking at is sparsely populated and virtually static. It nails the vibe of slowly progressing your understanding of the situation through observation alone, but there isn't quite enough signposting of the progression to provide catharsis, and it has some sections that go off the deep end in a way that doesn't quite mesh with the rest of the experience. Something like Strange Horticulture made me feel like a hard-boiled botanical detective, but its beautiful mechanics, while excellent for allowing you to do lots of cross-referencing, were focused on solving sequential puzzles, and I never felt like I was free to explore and observe. Unheard is focused entirely around listening in on conversations, but it requires consideration of sequence, timing, position and geography to answer the questions, and I'm going to say is the closest thing to Obra Dinn to this day. It also pulls off the idea very well, and I'm sorry if you haven't heard of it. And then of course there's the case of the Golden Idol, which while clearly in the same genre, made the, dare I say it, logical leap to a general missing word system. For the record, Cracks was about 90% complete when Golden Idol was released, so I didn't take any direct inspiration, but it's good to see that the system works, and I had a marvellous time playing through it regardless. It nails a lot of the vibe, while expanding on it in some exciting ways, but it has to make some more worthy sacrifices to player freedom to achieve this. The scenarios visit one scene at a time, the observations are mostly hotspots that thankfully let you consider the implications yourself, and the options for the answers are ingeniously pulled from the current scene, which massively limits the possibilities. I feel like the difference this makes is hard to articulate, but since I've spent years making a similar game, I'll give it a try. Obra Dinn has limited options, but they all fit the game's framework and are interchangeable without context. There's no telling whether someone was shot or decapitated without observing it. Anything could have happened to anyone, and knowing the options only contributes a tiny fraction towards figuring it out, such as if you're waiting with bated breath for someone to explode. But Golden Idol's limited options mean that only very specific things could have happened, and knowing those options does influence how you think about the scenario, when ideally the answers would be unambiguous once you'd arrived at the correct conclusion. There's a push and pull between player freedom and satisfying game design in this genre. Obra Dinn limits the player's movement into Death Watch pocket dimensions to create a more satisfying game, and the focus on names and fates is a massive limitation that is also a stroke of genius for creating a satisfying tapestry of solutions that avoids overwhelming the player. The fates are also sometimes ambiguous, which feels like it'd be a major problem, but somehow it works. Golden Idol has to limit the player's movement much further, but in return is able to expand the variety of answers and the potential for puzzles basically infinitely. And while the trade-off won't be to everyone's taste, it pushes the genre more towards letting the player work out the story entirely on their own, something that Obra Dinn only barely attempts. which is personally an evolutionary step that most intrigues me. In Cracks, I tried to increase both the movement and the variety of answers. The movement is technically limited by the fixed spots, but since the space is consistent and you're never put in a pocket dimension, there isn't scope for much greater freedom. This is balanced by having a relatively tiny, densely packed space to look at through tiny gaps at highly specific times of day. Options are of course limited, but there's so many that it doesn't help much when solving the puzzles. The trade-off to my puzzle variety is the way the Mad Lib's sentences are worded. They necessarily push you towards certain types of answer. As I said, it's a lot of push and pull, but I only knew how much was required after making pretty much the whole dang thing. I have a lot more to say, but I'd like to keep this video relatively short and snappy. I'll put up another video shortly to go through a couple of big, spoiler-heavy examples of how and why I deviated from Obra Dinn. Firstly, the relatively simple move from static dioramas to cycling animations, then the absolute minefield of focusing more on what happened in the story than what happened to the people. It should give more insight into my game and what I've learned about the possibilities and problems when trying to expand the genre. There's a chance there'll be future videos beyond that. I've heard that if you subscribe then you'll be informed when new videos are released, or you can do what I do and just keep bookmarks of channels and check them now and again because I have a pathological dislike of being told what to watch. So hopefully it's clear what I was going for and why, or perhaps more what I wanted to avoid. I've tried to make an open-ended scenario that required calm and considered logical inferences, with nothing that undermined your conclusions and no missable information, geared entirely around observation and scrutiny of subtle details. But aside from that, I wanted my game to be as different from Obra Dinn as possible, because I could never stack up to its style, direction, or cohesiveness. To justify its existence at all, my game needed to provide a unique experience, and you can watch the follow-up video for further elaboration. There is one more difference that is brief enough to mention here, and I should mention it since I stuck it in the title of this video. Cracks Where the Light Gets In is non-murdery. I drew attention to it because I couldn't think of a better way to market my game in a single sentence. I think it should intrigue people, because murder is such a core theme and central mechanic of Return of the Obra Dinn, also showing up in 90% of the games I've mentioned, that it almost feels like an essential ingredient in the genre, and therefore an oxymoron to leave it out. So why did I leave it out? The simple answer is, I don't like writing about murder, I'm just a bit too soft. This character flaw of mine gave me lots of problems, because murder is great for games like this. Murders are there to be solved, plain, simple, and easy to immerse yourself in. There's no need to justify up front why you're solving a murder. It creates lots of clues around the method and motivation, and it makes sense that the solution has been covered up and is not immediately apparent, and there's no one to provide clear answers. For my game, I had to put a lot of work up front into justifying why we're spying on these people from a position of complete ignorance, and had to continually justify it throughout its 4-act structure. It's still something I'm concerned won't be compelling enough, but at least it's something new. Of course, murder is also incredibly visceral and intriguing. Oh my, I'm staring down a barrel of a gun. Why is this man a bonfire? How come that circle suddenly stopped talking? The best I can do for my game is to have some drama in the opening, then juxtapose it against these cozy horror spectacles that everyone else is making, and hope some of the intrigue rubs off. Any other squeamish detectives in the audience? Cracks Where the Light Gets In feels like only one of several logical progressions of the genre, but all in all, I made it mainly because I enjoy the style of gameplay, and there aren't many like it out there. I don't have anything riding on it, I made it purely out of a love of games, and I wanted to see for myself what was going on behind the curtain, right up to making something for sale. I'm incredibly pleased with the end result. It surpassed all my expectations, and I'm bewildered that it came together into a cohesive whole, because for a couple of years it was just a disappointing collection of bad assets and broken mechanics. It's true what they say about finishing a project being exponentially harder than starting a project, as there's a massive leap of effort needed to turn it from merely functional to generally playable and enjoyable. In all honesty, I wouldn't use the word hard because I knew my scope, and I only tried to make this because I knew I probably could, but I still pushed myself right to the edge of my abilities and had to subject myself to a lot of art-like behaviour along the way. The follow-up video I mentioned will detail my relationship with art, but it suffices to say, if I want to delete a day out of my life, I only need to look at some shader code. It looks like programming, but it's actually art in disguise. I think the style works well enough. There are certainly ways to make low poly look incredible, but since this game involves zooming right in, it required some tricks to give a sense of depth and avoid seeing a blurry mess, so the untextured characters and objects that pop off the flatly textured backgrounds feels like the right choice. Settling on a style and learning enough about modelling, rigging, animating, materials, UVs, splat maps, lighting and 100 invisible programming nuances to pull it off was a real adventure. I really tried to make the valley appealing, and I think it gets there, but you know I'd love to see it with a professional coat of paint. More particle effects perhaps, better post-processing, remake the whole thing in Unreal so it looks like every other high-poly kitbash 3D game? I honestly don't know. And I probably wasted a month each on trying to attach physics objects to rigs or get cloth sims, dense foliage and volumetric lights working before giving up. All jobs for another project. If something looks weird, in this game or almost any other, I can say from experience that the creators probably know and dislike it more than you, but were just happy to have made anything at all. Give them the benefit of the doubt. There's usually dozens of factors. Laziness is almost never the reason why something looks or feels unfinished. As you can imagine, I learned a heck of a lot. Not just raw skills, but also stuff like how to push yourself through a project while constantly changing your discipline, from modeler to coder, from Foley artist to environment artist, or from actor to designer. It's so tiring when you want to focus on puzzles, narrative, and the player's experience, having to spend 10 times longer than that fighting fires or working on areas you're less comfortable with. Over the years of work and attention, one of the most important things I learned is that some days you're going to accomplish little more than moving a tree or stopping a hand from clipping into a bucket, but it's important to do something every day, however small, to keep yourself invested. 7-month hiatuses notwithstanding. I know that my game suffers from my lack of expertise, and I don't have the skills to give it the aesthetic polish it deserves, but I made it with intention. It has ideas you might not have seen before, and I really put in all the effort I had. You've got to with creative stuff like this. If it's universally reviled, or immediately falls into obscurity, then at least I'll know I tried my absolute best. The way I see it, maybe there's not a lot of demand for this concept. Or maybe there is, but not in the way I've executed it. But there is someone out there who will find my game incredibly fun, and I should do my best to help them find it. From my biased perspective, I can only say that if I hadn't made it, I would buy it and enjoy it anyway, which hopefully sounds like a very positive endorsement. I'd like to play a similar game made by a more experienced person or team someday, but I also don't think anyone else would have made something quite like this, and I'll leave you to decide whether that's a good thing. I've always wanted to make a game, so as it stands, I couldn't be happier, and it's a nice bonus if other people enjoy it too. I'm proud of myself for sticking with it when self-conscious doubt waited behind every unbeveled corner. I'm going to miss the project immensely, and it gives me chills to think of the void it will leave when it's over. If you've any interest in a game like this, or even if you've no interest at all in buying it, and you'd just like to lend a hand to make sure other people find out about it, what I'd implore you to do is to wishlist Cracks Where the Light Gets In on Steam via the link in the description. It's the only way to get any visibility on release, so even a wishlist that never turns into a purchase would still be an incredible help. And maybe have a scroll through the indie game dev forum on Reddit and wishlist a handful of games that catch your interest. Indie devs need all the help they can get. The roadmap from here is entirely unknown to me, but I've a few ideas. After completing the game and forcing a few of my playtesters through it to their satisfaction, the next step is releasing this video to hopefully gain a bit of marketing momentum and hopefully find playtesters within my target audience so I can make any final tweaks and fixes, at which point I'll have a game that I'm happy enough to start shoving it down people's throats. And as far as I'm concerned, just as the playtesting is an essential part of making a game, the marketing is just as important as making sure it doesn't crash on startup. I've got to approach it as methodically as possible and keep going until it meets some measure of success. I've got a list of indie publications to pester for reviews and awards, Reddit threads that I can burden with pithy headlines and interesting gifs, folks on Twitter to appeal to, and perhaps even publishers to prostrate myself before in the hopes they'll do some of it for me. I'd appreciate comments, especially if they're friendly, on whether you think this has any appeal, any suggestions to make it more appealing, any parts you particularly like the look of, or improvements based on what you've seen. If you're kind enough to share news of the game, I'd be curious to know where. Are there any good means of marketing it you can think of? You can't put a price on the made by one person vibe, but do you think finding a publisher would be appropriate to make it 10 times better and maybe sell 100 times more at the cost of that identity? And if so, do you have any suggestions? Or do you just have some kind words for someone at the end of a long journey who knows that the heartwarming exhaustion they feel every day will not remit for many years to come, and who sometimes refers to going to work as taking a break? I'd like to send out a personal thank you to anyone who's commented on my Let's Play of The Void. Over the past 10 years, it gives me a jolt of happiness every time, and I'm sorry I've had little to say. Since this is a puzzle game with predetermined answers, any testing I do personally is redundant. But I found as many playtesters as I could for this game, which on its own helped tremendously to improve the look, feel and fairness. But the sad truth is that most of my friends and family are not my target audience, and are in fact mostly a bunch of quitters, so I don't have many impressions of how people who are likely to play it would actually play it, or a balanced idea of what's great and what's garbage, how hard or fair or intuitive or unpolished it really is. So I'd like to ask for some help. I'm plonking this at the end to hopefully target mainly those who are interested and invested. I can only handle a few people because watching someone's playthrough requires a lot of focus, but if you think you meet those criteria, please send a private message and I might contact you on Discord and then send you a pre-release copy via Steam. Firstly, you consider yourself my target audience, by which I mean you're familiar with the genre, have played some of the games I've mentioned and are already considering buying my game. You don't mind playing an incomplete version of the game. The game is feature complete, but any changes you suggest I'm happy to consider implementing, so it is by definition incomplete without your help. You're therefore happy to provide lots of feedback within a decent time window, including providing fair but harsh feedback on every aspect of the experience. You have a means of recording your screen, or you don't mind me helping you get it set up, preferably also your voice, and are happy to provide running commentary, which is harder than it sounds. Finally, you're happy to discuss things further on Discord, so I can ask lots and lots of follow-up questions. That's all from me. Come back soon for a more direct comparison to Obra Dinn. Games are neat. Play games and take care of yourself.